The 1-2 punch of Bob Clark's Black Christmas in 1974 and John Carpenter's Halloween in 1978 is often considered the event that kicked off the slasher movie craze that dominated the horror genre and box office during the early 80s. And while there's no doubt those two films did unleash a seemingly endless wave of psychotic, masked killers to prey upon horny, partying teenagers everywhere, there's another even more specific trend Clark and Carpenter's films can be thanked for: the rise of holiday horror. Black Christmas wasn't the first horror film to be centered on a holiday. In fact, another Christmas-themed proto-slasher, Silent Night, Bloody Night, beat Clark's film to theater screens by 2 years. But the success of Black Christmas in '74 certainly sparked something. Clark's own idea of a potential sequel he wanted to call Halloween was at least part of the inspiration for producer Irwin Yablans and co-writer and director John Carpenter to rethink and rename the film they were making in '78, at the time called The Babysitter Murders. Realizing there had surprisingly never been a horror film centered around the spookiest night of the year, Carpenter fully embraced the idea of crafting a movie that could become synonymous with the holiday, and that film's massive success obviously influenced a lot of other producers, dollar signs in their eyes, to consider what other holidays could possibly be exploited for some killing spree carnage. The 80s would then see a number of holiday-related horrors. Oddly enough, not too many other filmmakers tried to make Halloween-related films. Perhaps they felt Carpenter's franchise, which lived on through multiple sequels throughout the decade, even eventually leaving Carpenter behind, had too strong of a claim to that particular holiday. But all the others seemed to be up for grabs. Christmas was the clear favorite, with movies like Silent Night, Deadly Night, Christmas Evil, To All a Good Night, and Don't Open Till Christmas. New Year's Eve had Terror Train and New Year's Evil. Thanksgiving got Blood Rage and Home Sweet Home. The annual tradition of April Fool's Day was given the horror treatment with Killer Party and, well, April Fool's Day. The sequel to Critters stuck out from the pack as the rare Easter horror movie. William Lustig's Maniac Cop set its climax during a St. Patrick's Day parade. And while not necessarily a holiday per se, of course the best and biggest example of a slasher franchise connecting itself to a particular date was when, in 1979, a young filmmaker named Sean S. Cunningham, looking to cash in on the recent success of Halloween, put an ad out in Variety announcing a new horror film before it even had a script written. Cunningham simply knew the title was too good, and wanted to lay claim to it before anyone else did. The name? Friday the 13th. So yes, holiday horror definitely took off during the 80s, as filmmakers and fans alike loved the idea of fright films focused on a particular date, because it meant rewatches of those films could become themed annual traditions themselves. It's an old trick several screenwriters have publicly acknowledged. If you want people to remember and talk about your movie every year, put a very specific date in it. It's how October 3rd, the day Aaron asked Katie, "What day is it?" has become known as Mean Girls Day. And why you might see some more miscongeniality talk than normal on April 25th, the day one of the film's pageant contestants lists as the perfect date. For the horror genre, these sort of date and holiday-specific connections allowed a fan base already eager to regularly revisit their favorites a fun excuse to do so. And no holiday was safe from the carnage and mayhem. Not even the one that, on its surface, would seem to represent the very opposite of the death and darkness associated with slasher films. For in 1981, Canadian director George Mahalka would unleash My Bloody Valentine into the world, allowing horror-hungry lovebirds their own twisted rom-com alternative to watch every February 14th. The film was a modest success, but surprisingly never saw any sequels, even as its own cult following grew, and other slashers of the time became full-blown franchises. But in the 2000s, when Hollywood realized the potential of dusting off the old 80s slashers for a new wave of remakes and reboots, Mahalka's film was a prime candidate. And not only would it become yet another remake in an era full of them, but this one would also be an early opportunity for audiences to behold new cutting-edge movie technology. The year is 2009, and Lionsgate Films is ready to launch a new slasher franchise with a remake of one of the genre's early classics, with My Bloody Valentine 3D.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
welcome once again to Failure to Franchise, the show dedicated to some of Hollywood's most infamous mistakes, missteps, and misfires. This is Trev.
And I'm Chris, here to discuss the 2020 music video by Machine Gun Kelly, starring Megan Fox, My Bloody Valentine.
You son of a bitch. You roped me into this. I thought it was going to be the movie we were talking about. I would have even accepted the classic, 80s band, My Bloody Valentine,
yes.
One of the great post-rock bands. But no, you got me into this to talk about a Machine Gun Kelly video. I refuse. I will not talk about Machine Gun Kelly.
I'm actually going to place all of their names in the SEO for this episode so we get the maximum amount of clicks.
Well, okay, I'm actually in favor of that. So.
Yeah. Machine Gun Kelly, Machine Gun Kelly, Machine Gun Kelly.
I think maybe Megan Fox will get us some more.
Yeah, that too. Yeah.
But no, this is the second installment of our February Frights 3D. Our look at two. Well, I was gonna say classic. And I remember we just did Texas Chainsaw 3D, but two 3D, slasher films, attempts to reboot or remake and kind of regenerate a couple franchises. So, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about the movie we're looking at today?
Sure. This is 2009's My Bloody Valentine 3D. Directed and co-edited by Patrick Lussier. He made a few features in his life, Dracula 2000, White Noise 2, and actually he went on to make Drive Angry, the Nick Cage film. He actually has he's kind of a prolific in a different part of filmmaking, which we'll get to. It's very interesting, so we'll get to that in a second.
Also, how dare you? I mean, let's just give him his props. I know we're going to talk more about him in a moment, but you said Dracula 2000, but let's give him his full due. He also goes on to direct Dracula 2 Ascension and Dracula 3 Legacy. He did the entire Dracula 2000 trilogy. I don't want you to bypass that.
That's fair.
Yep.
This one is written by Todd Farmer. He made Jason X.
Yes.
The Messengers, and also he wrote Drive Angry. So that was a little thing. And Zane Smith. I don't know who that is.
Me neither, yeah. I'm definitely very familiar with Todd Farmer as the writer of Jason X, very much a fan of his. He's kind of prolific online as well, but yeah, Zane Smith is a name that I can't lie and say I know too much about that individual.
The original 1981 film was actually written by John Beard and Stephen Miller, so I just wanted to throw that in as well.
Yeah.
The budget of this film was $15 million. Domestically, it made $51.5 million, and worldwide, it made over $100 million. So actually quite the success, and probably due to the 3D bump, as we like to say.
Yeah, I think that's obviously a big part of it, but this is exciting. We don't get to do these ones too often. Very often you and I are looking at complete bombs, movies that fall on their face, and every once in a while we get to talk about a movie that there's no disputing this was a hit movie. So I think that'll make the conversation kind of interesting later on in the episode when we talk about, well, then what happened, right? What was the missing key here in terms of why isn't this a franchise? Why aren't we... Well, we wouldn't be talking about My Bloody Valentine 6, but why aren't we watching My Bloody Valentine 6 right now? That becomes the question. Just really briefly before we go to the next thing, you mentioned that this is a remake. This is a remake of a 1981 film, My Bloody Valentine. And Chris, I was actually surprised to learn the other day that you've never seen it. And the reason I'm surprised is you might know this. To this day, I would say the original My Bloody Valentine is still thought of as kind of the Canadian slasher. It is like the most prominent of obviously those early 80s slashers. It is the most Canadian. When you watch it, it takes place in Canada. It stinks of Canada. It's just got that Canadian stench to it that I'm sure you know what I'm talking.
Your TV has like condensation of maple syrup coming out of it.
Yeah, and I can just feel like the Labatt Blue like pouring out of the TV as I'm watching it. But no, it's an interesting. I really like the original My Bloody Valentine. I think like one of the more interesting things about it, besides just the kind of Canadian vibe to it, is that particularly of that wave of slasher films, it's one of the few of those movies where most of the cast are adults. It's not like a teen-focused slasher. It's much more about kind of adult characters, and I think that's always like one of the standout elements of it. So I know you said you haven't seen it, but I'd recommend checking it out sometime.
I don't know why it's evaded me all these years. It's just, I guess, one of those things, right?
Maybe we'll throw it into your shame list next Halloween.
True. I do love my shame lists on Halloween. For newer listeners, every October or right before, I always ask Trev, hey, give me a list of horror films that are on my shame list or something that he knows that I should watch. And typically he throws like 10 to 15 my way, and I usually get through them all. I make kind of a point to get through all of them. And it's kind of our little tradition. It's been happening for a few years now. I really enjoy that time of year. So.
Yep. If I might be wrong about this, don't hold me to this, but I want to say even the band My Bloody Valentine, the Irish English band, I believe they took their name from the movie. I don't know if you know too much about that band. They're kind of like early like dream pop, noise pop, pioneers. But I think they named themselves after that.
I would lay their music underneath what we're talking about here, but we would.
No, we'll get in trouble for that.
yeah, as usual.
But people should go listen to them because they're awesome.
Okay, cool. So as I mentioned right off the top, Patrick Lussier, this is his directorial work. But I had mentioned that he is actually well known as a film editor, primarily kind of a Wes Craven protege. They met on Nightmare Cafe, a TV series from 1992, and then moved on to make New Nightmare together, the Scream trilogy, Red Eye. He's well known with Wes there, which is cool.
Even like Vampire in Brooklyn. Let's also you're kind of focusing on the highlights. Let's talk about some of those lowlights in there too, right?
Typical Trev fashion.
Vampire in Brooklyn. He also works on well, I wouldn't call it a lowlight, but he edited Music of the Heart, Wes Craven's drama, the Meryl Streep film.
Oh, okay.
Maybe very significantly to horror fans, he is the editor on Cursed, the werewolf film Wes Craven made that is known for having a particularly torturous production period. This is a movie that I'm sure we would talk about if there was any indication that it was meant to be a franchise, which I don't think it was. But I don't know if you know too much about this movie, Chris. This is a movie where they had an entire cast in place. They basically shot most of the movie, like 90% of the film, and then the studio decided they did not like that version of the movie, came in and basically made them almost entirely refilm it. Certain actors were dropped out of it. They recast certain characters.
Oh, wow.
The two main characters, played by Jesse Eisenberg and Christina Ricci, in the original cut, they were two strangers, and in the new cut, they became brother and sister. This is a movie that is just, to this day, it's like one of the most infamous examples of people really wishing they could see that first version, like see what Wes Craven's real vision was, because the version we got was clearly quite mangled. And the reason I bring him up in this is he's someone who, Patrick Lussier, has talked very much about that first version, because obviously as the editor, he's one of the people who's seen it, and it can often allude to how much better it was. Also, just a quick aside here, Chris, because I love my asides. You said he edited the Scream trilogy, which you're not wrong. He edited Scream 1, 2, and 3. But I want to ask you, just apropos from everything, what is your opinion on still saying things like, can you still call it the Scream trilogy? Does it bother you when people say like the Indiana Jones trilogy or the Scream trilogy? Because they're not trilogies anymore. Once you make a fourth film, can that terminology still be used?
No, it's got to become the Ghostface saga.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's what we've learned. Saga is the new thing after trilogy. You have to, you got to lead to the saga.
And if there's only 4, I like quadrilogy, because I like when we just have like nonsense words. Yes.
Yeah, I love my Alien quadrilogy that I have. Like now it doesn't count anymore, but it is kind of nice that I have that box set.
Yeah.
But I mentioned Patrick Lussier being an editor because if you don't mind, Trev, I just want to talk about my love of editing. It is something that I hold near and dear to my heart. Years ago, when I was in high school, I started to make short films, and I was really into the art of editing. And it's weird because I'm really not shy at all. I'm a salesperson in my career, and but I don't like being in camera. I just don't like being in front of it. I've always been behind the camera. And I actually wanted to go to film school in my earlier years, and I wanted to be a editor. I just absolutely loved it. Final Cut Pro was my main one, and actually this podcast, I edit all the episodes, and it's some of the simplest joys in my life. I love putting stuff together. It's so interesting. It's such an art form. If you're not going to direct something, editing is almost like your own crack at it. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Which is super cool. You don't have to be, directed by whoever. You're the guy in the background that placed all this hundreds of hours of footage together, and it's honestly a remarkable feat for people who do that job. And I just find it fascinating. I really find it fascinating. It's one of my favorite things in the filmmaking process.
Well, except for the nerdiest of film nerds, I definitely think editing is one of the most unsung features, and editors one of the most unsung heroes of the film industry. There's that old adage, which you've probably heard: a film is made 3 times, right? The first time in writing, the second time in shooting, and of course the last time in editing. And I'm actually kind of shocked that we don't see more editors go on to become directors.
Yeah.
Because I think you're dead right that they seem to be the ones, not that Patrick Lussier is the only example, but you look at it through general, you see how production designers sometimes go into directing, producers go into directing, actors, writers go into directing. But I'm shocked we don't see more editors simply because you're it's so close to, it's such an essential element of filmmaking, and it very much necessitates a pure understanding of how pace works, how story works, how to make a movie compelling through the flow. So yeah, I think if you are an impressive editor and like whatever you might say, Patrick Lussier's directorial career, looking at it, is kind of interesting in terms of what the kind of films he's done. But working with Wes Craven through that entire run, and obviously he's an accomplished editor, and it makes sense to me that he would go into directing. I'm just shocked we don't see that happen more often.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's the unsung hero of the films are editors.
Yeah, like some of your like favorite directors, everyone. Like we all love Martin Scorsese, unless you're some stupid Marvel nerd. But but he wouldn't necessarily be the Martin Scorsese we know if not for Thelma Schoonmaker, right? His classic editor. Quentin Tarantino had Sally Menke for a long time until she unfortunately passed away. Like a lot of these, you see this, like directors will find an editor and they'll just like lock into that editor, and you wonder like. There's a reason for that, because editing is very, very hard, and you find someone who's very talented at it and can make those decisions, you want to stick with them for sure.
And it's so collaborative at that point. Like the director is the final say most of the time, right? Yeah. Some of our episodes, maybe not, but most of the time the director is over your shoulder and telling you what to do or changing things on the fly. So you definitely need to get along with that person.
Yeah.
So
especially because the director needs that second set of eyes to tell them when they're wrong, right?
Yes.
Because that's at that point in the process, it's very much a kill your babies part of the process. The director is going to want to try and incorporate everything they shot, and it is up to the Patrick Lussiers of the world to be like, I know you spent 2 days filming the scene, but we just don't need it. It doesn't fit here. It doesn't add anything. So imagine that. Imagine having to speak to someone like a Wes Craven, like a Scorsese, and telling them, actually, we need to cut this. So you really have to trust your editors, and it's a testament to their skill to recognize that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I guess one more thing about filmmaking before we get into the meat and bones of the film itself is that My Bloody Valentine was the first R-rated film to be projected in Real D technology.
Yes.
They actually used the Red 1 camera to film it entirely. I remember this from all those years ago of all these filmmakers getting their hands on the Red camera. And it was like this big deal, how fast it shot, how great it was, the quality, the depth of field, how it shot in the dark, how it was really giving it that film vibe. So it was just an interesting technology. And I got to ask you, because this is kind of the beginning. In 2009, this movie was released. This movie actually was released January of 2009. Now, you're probably wondering, listener, why didn't the Valentine's movie come out on Valentine's Day weekend? Well, listener, Friday the 13th, the remake, came out on Friday the 13th, Valentine's Day weekend. Another great episode we covered, I guess, last year. So definitely check that one out. Again, this is the beginning of the 3D boom.
Yes.
Trev, what are your thoughts on 3D technology used in film?
Well, I can talk about that in two stages. I can talk about what I felt at the time and kind of how I feel now, because I don't know if it's the same case for you, but I think my thoughts on this have kind of evolved. So, when I was younger, I'm a child of the 80s, and I kind of remember, at least tangentially, I don't think I was too young to probably be going to see like Jaws 3D and Amityville 3D and Friday the 13th 3 in 3D in the theater. But I remember that wave, right? There was that year where like suddenly a bunch of horror films were being released in 3D. And then things like going to Epcot and seeing Captain EO in 3D. Kind of 3D is this kind of more attraction-based thing. And of course, hearing about the classic films that used to be in 3D. So we've always been kind of aware of 3D, but of course, most of that was the anaglyph red-blue glasses. Seeing Freddy's Dead in the theater in 3D with those red-blue glasses. And, it being 3D, but there being a lot of limitations to it. Also, when you're watching it, you're not getting the full colors of the film. So I remember at the time how exciting this initial boom was. And in fact, Chris, I have a very particular memory. So to bring it back to another movie you and I love to talk about, because we love to dispute everyone's stupid claims that nobody cares about this film. I very much remember one of the selling points of My Bloody Valentine coming out was that there's actually discussions about how this is like a sneak peek of like the 3D technology we're going to be seeing later this year coming from Avatar, right? Because this is where people are starting to look at this like more kind of like digitally based like you said, the red and like the digital 3D. And so people are saying like these early attempts, like My Bloody Valentine, it's like, yeah, this is what it's going to seem like now, and being kind of blown away by it. So I kind of get like or at that time in particular, I really got into the hype. Obviously I went and saw this, and I was very excited about the 3D. Do I need to say that the 3D in Avatar was mind blowing? It was incredible, right? Seeing it in the theater, and that was, like you said, very much for the first time. I felt like it being used for depth of field more than things just popping out at you. I just remember that one of the first shots in Avatar when it's just like kind of that like floating bubble of perspiration, and like how incredible that looked like in the theater. And then I was very, very into 3D, and then we got into that phase where, because it became a fad, as you said, suddenly every blockbuster had to be released in 2D and 3D. And then, of course, what we got was a lot of post-conversion 3D. Movies that weren't filmed for 3D and were turned 3D after the fact. And obviously, those never look as great. And this fad burned itself out pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And considering you were always paying a premium for 3D tickets, and usually you weren't really getting your money's worth because they didn't really put any true effort or any care or passion into making the 3D that substantial or stick out, it got to a point where I just couldn't stand 3D anymore, right? And I'm kind of glad that that fad has died. I'm not even sure how many movies at this point. I think maybe still some animated films do it, but it really seems like it's kind of just bypassed us, and that's perfectly fine by me. So 2009, 2010, 2011, all in, and then just kind of lost my passion for it as they seem to be less interested in going above and beyond and kind of actually, putting as much care and effort into it as someone like James Cameron would. What about you?
I'm very similar. 3D needs to be totally wacky or completely immersive.
Yes, if it's because it is a gimmick, right? So you either need to go all out with the gimmick and make it as gimmicky as possible, or you need to really put the effort into making it feel like you're actually being pulled into another world.
Yeah, and it has to be designed from the start. Before ever the cameras are rolling, they need to know what's going to be popping out or how much you're going to be going into the screen. I'm the same as you, of course, watching Avatar, and my scene that I remember all the time is the kind of cryo scene. When Jake Sully awakes and he's floating around, and then just seeing the depth going further and further into the capsule of all these other people awakening from their cryo chambers and stuff was just absolutely incredible to me. Think of the first time you saw Pandora. I always say that I almost like could smell the jungle. I could almost like feel the dew on like my face or something.
That was just like the guy sitting behind you in the theater. Remember what I said earlier? The stench of Canada? There you go.
You son of a bitch. But yeah, no, it was just, that's the way it is. It has to be gimmicky or immersive. And it's funny, I used to work at Best Buy. I've always been in the technology.
Humble brag. All right.
Oh yeah, right. I've always been in the watching the tech industry my whole life. It's just something that fascinates me. Mm-hmm. And I was working when the 3D TVs were coming out, and how everybody that worked there, that were interested in tech, just knew that this was going to be a complete and utter disaster.
Yeah. Because here's something I'd say to that. Okay, so to continue your question of me of like how I feel about 3D, I never loved the idea of 3D TVs. And I think this thing is like, once you transport 3D to a smaller screen in your living room, it's just by its very nature not as impressive. I don't know. I'm not as into like the idea of depth of field or gimmicky when it's just on my TV in my room. I think for 3D to be as impressive as it needs to be, and to be to kind of like really take you for that ride, it has to be a giant screen. You have to be in the theater in that dark room and have that entire experience. And yeah, as a home fad, I'm not surprised it didn't take off.
No, and especially because the 3D glasses were like $200 a pop. And you had to buy for a family of 5, you got to get all 5. And the TVs it was just so stupid, and they were so incredibly expensive. And we always kept looking at each other when like the Sony reps or whoever would come in and like pimp this technology. It just, when you started to question them on if this was, sustainable, they really didn't have an answer. So I'm not surprised in the slightest that 3D has taken quite a nosedive. I do know though, like you said, not many movies are released in 3D. Spider-Man was, which was strange. I know some friends that actually did see it in 3D just because of the times of the screenings. But I think it's good for big blockbuster fare sometimes. But again, post-conversion, see you later.
Yeah. Yeah, there's probably always an audience for it, but I think it's definitely lost some of its enthusiasm. And I think another important thing we should say, because this might actually, we'll probably come back to this when we talk about this movie later.
Yeah.
Something 3D films have to kind of keep in mind, and this really speaks to whether 3D is effective or it just as a gimmick, is when you're making a 3D movie, you have to remember that eventually a lot of people are going to watch this movie in 2D. Okay.
Yes.
So
Yes.
like one of like the kind of ongoing jokes about 3D, I remember like Albert Brooks making like a short film about this on Saturday Night Live like years ago, right? Is the idea of what is 3D, the gimmick of 3D when it's translated to 2D, and suddenly you just have a lot of characters throwing things at the screen, things like clearly being made to, you know, it's supposed to be popping out at you, but it's not. And that can become very distracting and sometimes like kind of aggravating or annoying when you watch some of these 3D films. And so that's why also I think that that depth of field approach to 3D is a little bit more effective, because then when you watch the movie in 2D, it's really not changing the experience for you too much. What would you say is kind of like your last great 3D experience in the theater? Because I was just thinking about that. I would say Gravity. I thought like the Gravity in 3D was incredible. And that might be the last time I was like super kind of into it.
That's my choice. Is Gravity.
Yeah.
That film is actually, I've been on record saying that's my favorite film of the last decade.
Yeah.
So, and it has a lot to do with that experience. I think I went to the theater 4 times to see that thing.
That's the movie where I was pointing to, where people don't really do, you know, back in the day before video and before streaming was a thing, people might know that they would like re-release movies, right? Movies would come out in the theater, and then a couple years later they'd re-release them again because people didn't get to see it otherwise. So you'd be excited because they're like, oh my God, here's my second opportunity to go see Star Wars or something, right? And I always point to Gravity as a film, and I guess you could do this with Avatar too, but Gravity is my always go-to example of, even though it's available to us to watch at home, and even though it's on streaming services, that is a movie that every 5 years or so they should re-release just to do the 3D run again.
Yeah,
because I would pay and go back to see that in 3D in the theater like every 5 years, just because it was so incredible.
I think about a year later, it was re-released in my city in 4K laser IMAX, and like me and my buddy rushed out to see that, and it was like it was almost like a religious experience, that film in IMAX like that. But I guess the next time I'm going to be watching something in 3D is Avatar 2.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm sure it's going to be awesome. Like I trust
yeah.
Cameron to, again, blow us away with it. But it'll be interesting to see if it is, like if Avatar 2 is actually the film you and I are expecting more than the naysayers. I wonder if there's any possibility of it like kind of kickstarting that boom again, you know?
Right.
Or will it be just kind of, will only be Avatar doing it because he does it better than anyone else? You know, that'll be interesting to see. I do think we should say, going back to this movie, horror is a genre that is particularly well suited for 3D.
Yes.
On the kind of gimmicky aspect you talked about. We don't care about depth of field in horror. But if you're talking about a genre where it's very fun, because horror by its very nature is a genre that's very fun to watch with an audience, and everybody screaming, everybody laughing after the scream, after being scared. When you can just amp that up with the gimmick of having the blood and guts or the chainsaw or the axe or whatever the case might be coming right at you, that is a good time if done well.
The horror genre also has the third entry 3D on lock. That seems to be a mainstay in the horror community.
This movie would throw people off with this movie. I wonder how many people, when this movie came out, they saw like My Bloody Valentine 3D, remember the 1981 film and said, "Holy crap! I totally missed My Bloody Valentine 2." Like when did that come out? I just must have not seen it, right? Because like this, I'm not sure if people were very aware that this was a remake or a continuation of that as a franchise. And Chris, before we get into talking about the movie proper, we'll talk about most of the cast members as we talk about the film. But I do think we should draw attention, just because there's a little interesting factoid here, to who the leading man of this film is, and that is Jensen Ackles, who most people, of course, know from his 38-year run on Supernatural on the CW. And the reason I think that's very, very interesting, because you just mentioned a few minutes ago that we've also already done an episode on the Friday the 13th reboot, which came out this same year, only about a month later. And interestingly enough, if you'll remember, the leading man of that was Jared Padalecki, who played his brother on Supernatural. They were the two leading men. And that was, I remember, kind of a big story this year, too. It was like the one year where they were both on this show, Supernatural, it's like this horror tinge show. And just one summer, they both decided, hey, we're both off for the summer from Supernatural. Let's just both go make horror reboots. Let's both be let's be the leading men in 2 new slasher films they're trying to resurrect. Well, this isn't necessarily a franchise, but a remake and a reboot. And I just thought that was very unique. And they came out so close to each other. I'm sure there was a little bit of a competitive spirit there. I bet you when they got back to the set, they were like comparing which one made the most. And I'm sure it was all fun. But I just think that's kind of neat and it's weird that never happened again. I'm surprised that Supernatural went on for so many more years after that. I guess obviously didn't go on with either of those because we covered these movies on our podcast. But
Yeah.
But they never went on to do like other, like they didn't seem to be like leading men in other horror films after this. So it's almost like this one and done experiment from them this year to say like, maybe I want to make a horror film while I'm on the break from my horror show.
We should at them and send them the links to these episodes.
Oh, I'm sure they'd love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know what we should also do? We should definitely get the Supernatural fan base involved as well because they're very passionate, and I'm sure. We had actually really positive things to say about Friday the 13th. So
we did actually. Yeah.
We actually got a lot of like love from Jared Padalecki fans for that. I remember. So we'll see what happens this time.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to just talk about the movie proper.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly what did you see?
Something was following us.
This is the most horrific event this town has ever seen. Authorities are calling this the Valentine's Day Massacre.
In the town of Harmony, something unexplainable
Hello?
is happening.
Come here, you better check this out.
What is it?
This January, prepare to witness
What do you want?
the most frightening 3D motion picture event to tear through the screen. Bloody Valentine 3D. Nothing says date movie like a 3D ride to hell.
Ten years ago, an inexperienced coal miner named Tom Hanniger caused an accident that killed 5 men and put a 6th, Harry Warden, into a coma. 1 year later, on Valentine's Day, Harry woke up and murdered 22 people with a pickaxe before dying. 10 years after that, Tom has returned home, still haunted by the past. And something else is back in town, a pickaxe-wielding killer in a miner's mask, who may be the ghost of Harry, come to claim Tom and his friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good basic description of a film that has some interesting twists and turns.
Yep.
So Chris, why don't you go first? Because I know you said you were telling me before that even though you'd seen this before, this felt like a first time watch to you. And this is a movie that I have a little bit more familiarity with. So I'm interested to hear, what did you think of it kind of revisiting it for the first time and what sounds like a long time for you, right?
Yeah, very long time. I actually didn't see this in theaters the first time.
Okay, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. The first time I saw it, if memory serves me, I think it was like sort of on watching it like on VOD or something. Mm-hmm. So that I've only ever had at-home experiences with this film. Mm-hmm. So what I'll say is that this film is if you threw Friday the 13th and the Scream franchise together. And I really enjoyed this movie. I think it is. It's got an interesting whodunit mystery to it that kept me engaged throughout the whole film. I thought it was quite fun in its gimmicky 3D. Even though I watched it at home, I at least understood that okay, this was meant to be seen in the theater. So I kind of regret that I never had that experience, but like I still got what it was going for. So like I dug it. Lots of gore. Right away, like I mentioned in the plot, that like Harry kills 22 people by the 15-minute mark. So right away, you kind of know what you're getting. So I liked it. I did, and especially coming off of Texas Chainsaw 3D, which I think was just like a total disaster. This just felt like a Scream movie, and I guess it makes sense that Patrick Lussier made this thing and being a protege of Wes Craven. But I think he learned a lot with that relationship. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I did see this in the theater, and I can just start without talking about quality of film at all. I will just say, in terms of how it uses the gimmick, I feel bad for you, Chris, because this was like a really good time in the theater, and you can tell when you watch the film, right? Even as you watch the 2D version, like I said, I'll just say this now, so I don't have to get back to it later. I do think they're lucky in that even though you can tell each one is supposed to be in 3D, it still works well enough in 2D. It's not too egregious where you're annoyed by it. But watching in 2D, I am reminded of how awesome those moments were in 3D in the theater, and the cheers and laughs they did get seeing it opening weekend. In terms of the film itself, I guess I'll just give away how I feel by saying, you and I, in the course of the show, we've already done plenty of other movies that we definitely, say like, oh, that's kind of where we feel bad that it didn't get sequels, right? Like, something like John Carter or Dredd. We're like, man, I wish that could have gone on. This to me is really one of the ones that I think frustrates me the most. That this did not go on to become a franchise. And we're going to talk about that in terms of it being an actual hit and just setting up so well for more. Because like you, I really enjoy this film. I just mentioned that this is a film I've actually revisited quite a bit, and I mean it. This is a movie I've watched multiple times since it first came out. I will probably lose some of my horror brethren with this. I prefer this to the original, and I like the original quite a bit, but I think this one is just a little bit more fun. The original has a little bit of a slower pace, and I think that's you can't say that about this movie. No. This movie hits the ground running, and you're kind of with it all the time. And we're going to talk about the twist later. We want to save it just in case people haven't seen the film. But I think what this movie does really well with the twist, in terms of its relation to the original film, but just in general, is when you watch it a second time or a third time knowing the reveal and you're paying attention, this movie actually isn't hiding the twist all that much. It's actually pretty upfront about what the reality is, and yet it still finds a way to, even though it's really telling you what's going on, it plants just enough seeds to where you start to think maybe the other thing could be the truth. Right? It does that really, really well, which I think is tough for some films to pull off. Where you're like, oh yeah, it's clearly this thing, right? And then it does turn out to be this thing, but at about the 2/3 mark, they start to make you question that really, really well. And I thought, like, I was really impressed with, so Todd Farmer and Zane Smith, hats off to you. And yes, hats off to Lucier for just making a really fun film. And the last thing I'll say is this and Friday the 13th this year, we're finally getting a little bit of a resurgence for the slasher boom today with, films like, Happy Death Day and Freaky and now Scream coming back. But for a long time, those two movies, and even more so this one than Friday the 13th, 2009, oddly enough, really felt like the last kind of gasp of like the traditional classic mainstream slasher film.
Yes.
Like this movie is gratuitous in ways that you just don't see anymore in terms of the gore and nudity. It's like so over the top, so balls to the wall. And even though we're getting slasher films coming back now, I don't think you're going to get any today coming from a major studio that feel like this film. So this film is also a time capsule element to me where it's like, oh, I missed this kind of slasher film. So yeah, this movie rules.
That's awesome. I'm so happy you thought that because I usually can clock how you're going to feel about a horror film. But this one, just part of me was just like, I don't know how he's going to feel. And listeners that are new to this, we never tell each other what we think before going into this recording. So that's awesome. I'm very excited. You're talking about how gratuitous this film is, right? And this movie is such a throwback to that 80s slasher everything. Back in the Friday the 13th episode that we do, Trev goes on a little bit of an editorial about his love for that franchise. That's his favorite franchise of all time. And you're right. That type of horror film is missing. And in this one, we have a main character played by Betsy Rue. She has a murder scene and she is completely naked. Front, back, all of it for a long time.
Yes. Extended full frontal nudity from her. Yeah.
And a lot of people that criticized the film said that this was too gratuitous. And they were like, it just felt like Patrick Lucier and Todd Farmer and them just wanted to see Betsy Rue naked for the day. Incorrect. Betsy Rue actually came out talking about this in 2012, saying, "That was the whole point of what I wanted to do. Okay, I'm going to be naked, so I better be good instead of just being naked. I wanted the audience to forget about the fact that I was naked, running around the parking lot and getting killed, and actually have them scared for me."
Yep. Yeah, so she suggested the nudity to the filmmakers herself. And I think she got it, right? And that's the thing is, like, there's something about that scene that is very funny because, obviously it's this beautiful woman, she's naked. And we're talking about the gratuitous nature. And this is the thing, this is what's tricky about gratuity in films, because sometimes you can be kind of put off by it when you do feel like an actress is being taken advantage of or it feels unnecessary. And this movie gets it just right to where it goes on for so long and it's kind of so in your face that it actually starts to be funny.
Yeah.
And you get that that's what the movie is doing, right? When you get to a certain moment where she's just standing there arguing with him, when she follows, she's actually, so the kind of setup of the scene is she is having a rendezvous with a trucker played by Todd Farmer, the screenwriter, in a motel. And it turns out that he has been filming them having sex, which she didn't know. And she gets very upset about this and chases him out into the parking lot to confront him. And he ends up being the first victim of the apparently returned Harry Warden. And then he chases her down. But when you cut to like her just argue with him and then following him out to the parking lot, brandishing a gun, then running away from the killer, all naked, you can't help but laugh at like the ridiculousness of it, right? It's no longer about titillation. It's about, oh my God, I can't believe they're sticking with this as long as I've never seen a nudity scene so protracted in a film like this.
Yeah, and she's obviously totally game for it as well.
Yeah.
Like typically in these types of films, when there is gratuitous nudity or a sex scene, sometimes it's like painfully obvious when the girl is like very uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Like it's very like they're wearing it on their face, and especially in like some schlock. But this one, Betsy Rue just seems like she is completely down for the film and what's going on, and she gives it her all, and it's a great scene, and it really has nothing to do with that she's naked. You know, like she sells it so well. It's fun, and you know, like there's the nudity and then the gore. Like I mentioned, like, or you just said, like that trucker gets his head spiked in with that pickaxe, and it just like, and the camera stays on it, and it looks like so silly and funny. I couldn't get over how bloody this movie was. 22 body count by the 15-minute mark, and then they just walk through the hospital where this all took place. And there's just bloody dismemberments fucking everywhere.
And
like
that's another moment that tells
show.
you that that's another moment that tells you what this movie is. Because like in no realistic world could a minor that had been in a coma for a year wake up and kill that many people in a hospital with like nobody being able to stop him. And that's where you just realize you have to throw your hands up and be like, okay, this movie's operating on a certain reality. We should just be along for the ride. And once you're along for the ride, amazing kill after amazing kill, especially utilizing that gimmick. It's still fun in 2D. But some of these, you know, their very first kill of the film, when the pickaxe, when he hits the guy in the back of the head with the pickaxe and pops the eye out, which is obviously a nod to a similar kill in Friday the 13th 3D. But the one I always remember, there's a lot of good ones. The one I always remember, and probably my favorite kill in the entire film, is when he takes the shovel and shoves it into the girl's mouth, and then the top half of her head kind of slides down the shovel towards the audience. I remember that being such like a cheer in the theater. And yes, we are horror fans. We're sick. We cheer and stuff like that. Deal with it. But it's so funny. It's so ridiculous. And this movie just utilizes the 3D and just its willingness to go for the gore immaculately, I'd say.
Yeah, I was nodding along that entire time. That was my favorite kill of the whole film. It was awesome. Again, it sounds so gross when you say that, but it's like it was just like super fun. Again, when you understand when a film like this is doing what it's doing, like when you realize you're on the level with it, you can let yourself go and have a blast with it. You know, it's not like a Saw. Like I love the Saw films, obviously, but like sometimes it's like just really really gross that I understand that people can be turned off with like skin getting peeled off and needles getting all over you. I understand that. But when it gets to a certain schlocky goofiness, like this film, and it helps because of the gimmicky 3D, you're on board the whole way, and all you can do is laugh at it. It's funny, we're talking about when it clicked, what kind of movie this is. And actually, when it clicked for me is right in the beginning. First of all, the main title animations are the most gimmicky main title animations I've ever seen. It's just like everything's flying at the screen.
Yeah.
And it's giving the backstory of the minor and like, you know, how Harry's in a coma. Well, then it cuts to the hospital, right? And Harry's in a coma, and this nurse is coming in to check on Harry and his meds. All the lights are on, Trev, in this in this room, and she walks right up to the bed, you know, looks at the fluid, and then notices that there's no body in the bed. and I burst out laughing, and I was like, okay, I'm in. I'm excited for this movie.
Yeah. And let me just quickly say, too, so we've talked about the nudity, we talked about the gore, but let's just also acknowledge something that works for this film, and I want to bring this back to the original film. Because to this day, I'm actually very shocked that the first movie didn't get sequels. Because, you know, it was successful, And it seems so primed to be a franchise, as does this one, for a couple reasons. And one in particular is, can we just talk about how awesome the Miner looks as a killer?
Yes.
So both the original and this have a very interesting structure in that we know My Bloody Valentine. When we talk to horror fans, they'll say like, oh yeah, Harry Warden. Harry Warden is like the killer miner. But in both films, the entire Harry Warden element of it, Harry Warden is this miner who gets buried in a cave in the mine and resorts to cannibalism, essentially, and kills the other miners he's stuck with, and then kind of comes back as a killing spree. That's all prologue in both movies. And then the rest of the film is about a potential return of Harry Warden. And without spoiling anything specifically, in both films we eventually learn that it's not actually Harry Warden. It's someone who's like now taken up the role. So putting that aside, realizing, okay, it's about a mystery of is this Harry Warden or not, whether it's Harry Warden or whether it's the other person wearing the costume, damn, that is a good slasher look. Mm-hmm. Intimidating, genuinely scary, just looks badass. The pickaxe is an awesome slasher villain. I can't believe we don't have like 15 My Bloody Valentine movies just off of that alone. Like, there's no reason this character, the killer miner, shouldn't be as iconic as like a Jason, or a Michael Myers, because it's just such a great look.
You've frequented horror conventions in the past. Uh-huh. Do people ever dress up as the miner?
Yeah, you will see it. You'll see it for sure. It's not, like I said, that's the thing. It doesn't get as much attention as some of the other characters, but you do see it because it's almost too good not to do. And it's kind of probably somewhat easy costume to get, to just get the black jumpsuit, then get some of the other like mining equipment, the mask and everything, and it's instantly iconic. So like horror fans definitely recognize it. I'm just shocked it didn't have like a bigger impact and kind of move beyond just that small little niche horror audience and be. Like I said, I feel like Harry Warden, or just the miner, if you want to say, since it's not always Harry Warden, I feel like should be kind of up there on that plateau with characters like Pinhead and Chucky. And it's weird that we've only got 2 of these so far.
It's funny because after I was done this film, I was like, wow, okay, like I know it's a remake, so I went back to see if there was any more filmography, and I was actually surprised that there was only 1 of these films made. Mm-hmm. It just seems ripe for franchise.
Yeah.
It really doesn't make sense. I will definitely check out the first one, but yeah, it's strange. Did you want to talk about the cast a little bit more in depth?
I do, because there's a lot of interesting cast and cool cast members in this, for sure. So is there anyone we already talked about Jensen Ackles. Well, it's actually just we talked about him being in it, but what do you think of him in this? Because I remember the time I saw this, my big question mark coming in. So I hadn't watched a lot of Supernatural, but what I had watched at that time, I might have mentioned this in the Friday the 13th episode, but I felt that Jared Padalecki was kind of the more naturally charismatic of the two, and just felt like, I don't want to say like a better actor, but just felt more like free on like screen, right? It felt like sometimes I would watch Jensen Ackles and feel like he seemed kind of reserved and stiff. And so I went into this kind of concerned about that. And I think the movie actually uses that to his advantage, right?
Yes.
He plays it off that way because this is a character who's been through trauma and is kind of like always, very, very reserved. And then as you get into like later reveals, I end up like really, really digging him in this. So what do you think of Jensen Ackles here?
Yeah, I agree. He's handsome as hell.
Oh, yeah.
As a cis heterosexual man. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good looking guy.
Yeah, he could be my Valentine. That's
yeah. Yeah, no, he was very good. This movie plays to his strengths and his weaknesses. So it's I dug him quite a bit. As every character does, which we'll get into, I think every actor kept you guessing. Mm-hmm. And I think he was very good at playing that role. Now for the female lead, his love interest, Jamie King, I knew I recognized her. First of all, she's got a very Emma Stone vibe. Am I wrong about that?
No, I know what you mean. I don't think they're like twins or anything, but I know what you mean.
Okay. But she is most known in my eyes from Sin City, playing Goldie. Other than that, I'm not super familiar. But she plays Sarah Palmer, like I said, Tom's, I guess, ex-lover, ex-girlfriend from 10 years ago when the original massacre happened at the mine. She got away, and Tom also did, but Sarah's moved on at this point. Mm-hmm. And something that I actually really loved about this film is that they gave her such a strong backstory, but like in the sense of like what's been going on with her life in the last 10 years. They gave her a family. They gave her a whole life. She's married to another character in the film called Axel, played by Kerr Smith, which we'll get to. And I thought that just added a lot of stakes to the relationship. And, Tom's back in town, ex-lover Sarah's now married with children, and, that sucks for Tom. And sucks for her too. She thought he was dead. They have not talked to him in 10 years. So I really dug her. I liked her a lot. She sells it quite well.
Yeah, I think this is another, I like we were saying with Jensen Ackles in terms of a movie playing to someone's strengths. I think Jamie King is just kind of naturally likable.
Yes.
Something very just kind of charismatic, and you want to root for her, you want to protect her, you want her to make it through. And the movie plays that strengths very well. I also just want to say, because you mentioned the fact, so just as a little quick aside, but related, you mentioned the fact that the movie starts 10 years ago. And we get Jensen Ackles, Jamie King, and Kerr Smith, who we'll talk about in a moment, as the 10-year younger versions of them. This is one of the few movies I've ever seen. It's weird for it, otherwise kind of just being this dumb exploitative slasher film that actually pulls that age thing off pretty well, to where I buy them as the younger selves, and then when they all come back 10 years later, they equally play the adult versions of them pretty well.
Yeah.
The age up actually works here. I think even though it's the prologue bit is brief, you get a different energy from them. I think in particular her and Kerr Smith, they do feel different when you cut forward 10 years, and you do feel like they have lived a life. And I think she's really fun in this. She's one of those, actually, looking at her filmography, you're right. I know her from Sin City. I saw her in Blow and things like this, but she's another one where you just watch this and you're like, oh boy, she should probably be a little bit of a bigger deal, right? There's just something kind of naturally charismatic about her. And she's really fun in this. Yeah.
And let's finally talk about Kerr Smith. We keep mentioning him, and he is great in this. I think he's maybe the unsung hero. In the very beginning of the movie, like I said, the trio is 10 years younger, and he's kind of a dickhole. He's kind of that jockey asshole. And 10 years later, he's the sheriff. And I love that dichotomy. I think it's just such a great character arc to see this douchey bro go from that to the sheriff and protector of a town. And I just loved seeing that. I loved seeing the character grow like that.
Yeah. Because there's something unspoken there, right? Somehow that bro we saw in the beginning got a town to vote for him as sheriff, and then you watch the movie, you're like, yeah, I get it. He seems pretty competent in the role,
It's funny because I recognized him as well, and looking back, he was in Final Destination.
Yes.
He was Dawson's Creek. He was in Charmed for a bit. But other than that, again, he's mostly TV. All these people seem like they're mostly TV, and all of them are so good. They should have had bigger careers.
So I have this, it's not a confession, but just a general kind of thought about Kerr Smith, and that he's a weird one, because you're right. I just looked at his filmography, and I was looking at particularly the films, and I was like, this guy's only in 12 movies. That's so weird, because he is an actor that whenever he pops up in a show that I watch, I instantly go hey, it's Kerr Smith. And in my head, I always think oh, Kerr Smith, of course everyone knows him, right? He's a big star. And I realized that the only reason I think that is simply because I know him primarily from Final Destination and My Bloody Valentine. Yeah. And I definitely remember Final Destination, because that's another movie I love, and that's a franchise I love. And I definitely remember that. And then I think you're right in that he might be the best performance in this, actually. It's those two movies alone in my head, I go Kerr Smith, of course, everyone loves Kerr Smith, right? And they're who the hell are you talking about? Who is Kerr Smith, right? I'm well, you should go watch this movie, trust me. I'd be down for a Kerr Smith resurgence. I know apparently he's on Riverdale now, or he was recently on Riverdale as we love the character names on Riverdale. He played Principal Holden Honey. That's a good character name.
Did you stop watching Riverdale?
Well, I'm behind on Riverdale, but I don't like to say I stopped, because I do intend to catch up. That show's too dumb not to continue watching. Yeah. So
you can't quit Riverdale.
I can't quit Riverdale. No.
I guess the next cast member I want to talk about is somebody. It's again, I love my Matrix moments, Trev, and I think you know where I'm going with this. Last episode we talked about Texas Chainsaw 3D, and there was a actress in that film that was from a little show called Lost. Okay. Now I'm watching this movie, and then right away, Kevin Teague? How do you say his last? Teague. Kevin Teague shows up. He played Anthony Cooper, John Locke's biological father in Lost. And I'm sitting here being like, I love it when a Matrix moment and stars align, and Trev hates it, but I love it.
Yeah, I'm recently rewatching Lost, and I just watched that episode a couple days ago. The episode where Locke meets his dad, and of course things don't go well for him. So that was fresh in my mind. But I think, like many people, my main Kevin Teague association is Roadhouse. One of the greats of American cinema. I've always said it's Citizen Kane, Vertigo, and Roadhouse, of course. and he plays the owner of the club that kind of recruits Dalton in. So Kevin Teague, I always associate with that more than anything else. But yeah, he's also quite good in this, and like kind of an interesting role because. Okay, I know we're going to sound silly now because we're talking about My Bloody Valentine. Earlier, we were talking about, isn't it great that there's like tits in this and a girl's face slides down a shovel? But if we can give this script and these actors some credit, in a small role, he actually has quite a few levels here. Like even the scene where Tom comes back into town and Kevin Teague greets him at his house to invite him back in. So Tom, the Jensen Ackles character, he is still, because his dad owned this mine and his dad has passed away, he is now the mine owner, but he has been away from town for 10 years. Well, he's coming back to sell the mine. And the entire town is kind of upset about this because they assume they might lose their jobs and everything. So Kevin Teague is kind of like one of the main power players in the town. And when he first greets Tom, he's like very, very nice. He's like very excited to see him. He's like, Tom, good to see you, boy. Brings him inside. And then as he starts to talk about the mine, you see like the anger building and like the kind of like resentment of what's happening. I'm like, this is like too good almost to like be in this movie. Like this, like the complexity of this relationship. So like, I'm not saying it's like one of the most amazing things I've ever seen, but I'm saying most movies wouldn't even bother to try to have even that level of like character development or have this character be as like interesting as he is.
There's depth in this movie, and not just talking 3D. There's history behind these characters, and all of these actors really, really sell that. And it's a testament to the script, the directing, and the editing. But man, do these actors really sell it? And you're so right. When Kevin Teague's on screen with Jensen Ackles, there's like a real animosity that builds. There's a real tension that you can cut with a knife. It's really good. Like we're making this seem like this is some masterpiece, but I understand what movie this is.
Yeah. But
for a 3D slasher gimmicky, schlocky movie, it's got some real artistry to it.
Well, that's important, right? Because like whatever you said about the movie, at some level, there is at least a time in this movie where everyone is meant to be a suspect, right? You're supposed to be. It could be Kevin Teague, right? He could be the person who's decided to, put on this costume to maybe prevent the mine from being sold. So like, if everyone has to be a suspect, you have to make everyone compelling.
Yes.
And you have to like so. Whatever the reveal is at the end, it's satisfying. And since we're talking about Kevin Teague, if you'll allow me, Chris, I can't let us go without, of course, highlighting another incredible older character actor in this. This to be, I mean, I'm sure you probably know where I'm going with this. The highlight for me here, you said the Kurt Smith is probably the best performance, but man, am I just always happy to see Tom Atkins.
Yeah.
The mustache himself, the star of Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, the most underrated Halloween movie. Night of the Creeps, he's in The Fog, Creep Show, just a horror icon, really kind of a cinema icon in like my circles. Tom Atkins rules. This movie was like kind of the start of a little Tom Atkins like comeback resurgence. We hadn't seen Tom Atkins for a while in like a kind of a big way. And then they Todd Farmer and Lucier kind of brought him. I don't know if he was retired, but they definitely brought him back for this. And then they put him in like kind of a very substantial kind of scene stealing role in Drive Angry as well. And that kind of like got the ball rolling of people getting back into Tom Atkins. He's the sheriff of the town in this, and he's just always fun. There's just something about Tom Atkins where he kind of always plays every character that he inhabits as kind of being like the movie's like a little bit below him. But it like works, right? He's got this like I'm too good for this, or like this kind of general smarmy but still charismatic attitude, and I think that works really well in this as well. So yeah, I loved Atkins in this.
And again, there's depth and an arc to him because, like you said, he's the sheriff, but he was the old sheriff. He was the sheriff during the Harry massacre, right?
Yes.
So like 10 years has passed, he's retired, and now seemingly this new Harry's back. The ghost of the past is back. Maybe it's Tom Atkins. Maybe it's him now. So like there's this whole... You're so right when you said every character needs to be a suspect. And during this entire film, I'm like, Tom could be the killer. Sarah can. Axel. Irene, Deputy Martin, Burke, Ben Foley, all of these people, I'm thinking, wow, like I would not be disappointed if any of them were the killer. Maybe not Irene, because she was Betsy Root. She was the naked chick that got killed. But you know what I'm getting at.
Or it could just be Harry Warden, right? That's also like
true.
The possibility, yeah. I also just love Tom Atkins' old-ass deputy in this, Officer Hinch. Just got a few lines, but it kind of like a little scene stealer. Just as like when we first meet him in like the flashback sequences, he's already like old as shit, and then he's kind of like still around 10 years later. I just love to look that up, and that was played by an actor named Bingo O'Malley. Bingo O'Malley, according to Wikipedia, has been called Pittsburgh's finest actor. So
no shit.
Yeah,
that's a great name.
It is.
Great name. Yeah.
And Chris, there's one more substantial actor we should highlight in this, and I'm not sure if you're aware, like how this is someone who's kind of gone on to greater fame after this film. But as Megan, the kind of the other factor in like the love triangle here, I don't even know if it's a love triangle. We learn that Axel is cheating on Sarah with Megan, and there's like a little bit of complication there too, because there is a reveal that he's just kind of having this affair on the side, and then Megan actually tells him, "I'm pregnant." And this is obviously not good news for him. And you have to wonder, is that the kind of news that would set someone off on a killing spree? But that character, Megan, is played by Megan Boone, the actress. And that might sound familiar to people because after this film, she went on to be the star of the long-running show The Blacklist.
Yeah.
So, and so this is, I don't know if this was like necessarily her start, but this was definitely her kind of pre-TV fame for sure.
And again, she's great in this. Like, she's really good. She's really believable as actually she's the coworker to Sarah in her grocery store. She works side by side with Sarah and also is sleeping with her husband. So the drama, the tension's there. So again, all the pieces involved have a glimpse of where they could snap. You know, they all have a reason to snap. Maybe not to, brutally murder and rip people's hearts out. Fair enough. That should maybe take a little bit more than what they go for. But in this universe, in this film, it feels like everybody could have been the killer. And just excellent relationships and dynamics all the way through.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think we've been kind of treading lightly here because we didn't want to necessarily right off the bat spoil the reveals of this film. But obviously, to talk about this film and to talk about more of what we like and more of what's effective or maybe not effective, we'll see, right? I think we have to go into spoiler territory. So if you haven't seen the film yet and you're at all intrigued by what we said about the mystery of it, I would actually implore you to turn off this episode at this point and go watch it and then come back to us.
Yeah.
Let's just say right off the bat, I think we both let's just say, because we don't have to wait around, people will kind of get it. We both recommend this film, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, definitely check this one out. So that's your warning, right? So at this point now, we have to move into spoiler territory. So there was your warning. Sorry, that's it. All right. Chris, what do you think about the reveal? And do you want to tell the audience what is the reveal and how does it kind of play out?
So the reveal is Tom Hanniger, played by Jensen Ackles, long lost for 10 years, was actually in a mental institute.
Yes.
And he has come back to town, and he has donned the minor persona and is going around killing everybody. He doesn't even know that he's doing it, though. Right. So this is the thing. It's more of like a split personality. Something's going on here, which actually I want to talk about later, where I think the sequels could have gone. But there's maybe something supernatural happening, and he doesn't even know that he's the killer, which is brilliant. I love that.
And as I said, when you watch the movie a second or third time, you realize how kind of clear that is, and yet the movie does these kind of... Now, I've sometimes seen people call these cheats, and I don't think they're cheats, because I think the movie justifies it later, where you have a couple moments where Tom encounters the miner, where like the miner kind of like, appears to him, and there's a scene where like the miner like locks him in a cage while he murders some other people, and scenes like that. But when the reveal comes later in the film, the movie justifies that by showing those moments and show how Tom's mind is so fractured that that's what he thought was happening.
Yeah.
He kind of disassociated and locked himself in the cage, by putting the pickaxe through the screen there and like locking himself in after he did the murders. But in his head, he's not Harry Warden. He's not the miner. He is Tom Hanniger. And that's what sells this movie. That's what works very well is you watch the entire movie and you think up until that point where he finally accepts who he is, anytime he's accusing Axel of being the miner and anytime he's trying to protect Sarah, that's real. That is like really what he thinks is happening. He thinks he's the hero here. And I think that's more compelling than a guy who's just lying to the audience and lying to the other characters throughout the entire movie. So I know like the split personality thing can be like a little bit of a cliche in horror movies, and maybe it is overused, but it's done pretty well here.
Can I just go back a little bit to what you just said? My only nitpick about the twist, the only nitpick is that locking in the cage misdirect. Okay? Because I understand, so like earlier in the movie, Tom Hanniger watches the miner kill somebody, and he's locked into this cage by the miner. Okay. And what drives me a little crazy with the reveal
I
is
think
that
I know what you're going to say here.
yeah, like it shows Tom, it flashes back, it does that quick cut thing, like kind of like what Saw does, you know, like it shows what actually happened. And it shows him reach out with the pickaxe and the costume inside the cage.
Yes, yeah.
And he locks himself in. And I'm thinking, I was like, well, people let him out of the cage.
Yeah.
There's the costumes right there and the pickaxe. Like
I have thought about that. Well, that is actually the movie's like one kind of like mess up in this, and that's the one time, that is the one flashback where he should have shown that he didn't have the costume on.
Correct.
That he just like murdered those people in his regular Tom clothes, because even if he takes the costume off and throws it aside, where can he throw it aside to? He's in a cage. It's just going to be crumpled up there in the corner, you know. So yeah, that one doesn't quite track. You're not wrong.
And it's funny because that's just a testament to the movie though, because like that would really fucking annoy me because I'm Mr. Rules.
What are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules? What are the rules?
But it didn't annoy me. It was kind of like a minor nitpick.
The movie makes up for it with that badass part, and I just love this. Every time I watch the movie, I get so into this. When he's smashing the lights.
So awesome.
And every time he smashes the light, there's the brief flash of him in the miner costume, even though he's not actually wearing it. Dude, how much does that rule?
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good. Like, again, immediately iconic in the horror landscape. And again, baffling that this didn't become anything more after that.
And I watch a sequence like that, of a purely visually driven sequence where there's the light flashes and the Harry Warden costume appearing, and I just go, there you go. This is what happens when you hire an editor to direct a movie.
Yes,
like that's
exactly.
that. There you see it. Is he like probably in the editing thought of like, well, wouldn't this be cool? Or but maybe thought of it ahead of time, but because of his editing experience. Yeah. So Chris, I was originally trying to like think of how I would talk about this because I didn't necessarily want to spoil this for you, but based on some of the research you sent me, I'm assuming this has already been spoiled for you. In that. So apologies for spoiling the 1981 My Bloody Valentine for anyone. But what this movie actually does pretty interestingly as well. So you and I have talked often about when you remake something, how do you kind of subvert the expectations? What's pretty neat about this one is it's actually the exact opposite of the reveal in the original one. In the original film, it is Axel who's revealed to be the kind of the person who's taken up the Harry Warden identity. And the Tom Hanniger character, who's called TJ Hanniger in the original, is the hero. So I thought that was like a fun kind of like, you know, if they were sitting down and think like, well, for those My Bloody Valentine super fans who are going to come and sit down for this, how do we kind of surprise them? How do we kind of, you know, not give them what they're expecting? A lot of those people might have been watching this movie waiting for the moment where Kerr Smith is revealed. And the movie does give you enough justification for that. There is definitely a sequence in this where you're like, yeah, I think it might be Kerr Smith. But then the movie kind of turns it on its ear. So I just wanted to give him credit for that. I think more remakes should do stuff like that, right? Play with the expectations by just tweaking it just a bit.
I agree. Like, even there's the scenes that are alluding to Axel being the killer, you know, like we said, with the relationship with the pregnant affair, you know, mistress, sorry. And then like going to the cabin where they have been fooling around and seeing all of the empty box, like Valentine's Day boxes where, you know, the killer puts hearts into, and also just Kerr Smith's general like energy in the movie. It's very antagonistic. You know, like
dude, he has like a great moment. Speaking of this, where because you know, like they were probably telling everyone, you got to play this at least at times where people could buy you as the killer. And there's a sequence where, and this is where the point where the movie is really starting to make us feel like it is Tom, right? But again, the movie never like lets us lock in directly to it, because we've just now. So Tom has Sarah in his car, and he's taking her somewhere to show her something. What he's saying to her is he wants to show her evidence that Axel is the killer. Axel calls her and reveals to her that he's just found out, hey, the entire 10 years Tom was gone, he was in a mental institution, so we should be worried about him. So as an audience member, you are now thinking he was in a mental institution? Okay, he's the killer. And yet Tom seems very innocent, and he says, like, don't listen to him. That's not the truth. Mm-hmm. And then when Sarah does not listen to Axel necessarily, they cut to Kerr Smith hanging up the phone. And just how sinister he looks in that moment as he's like aggravated that she's not taking him seriously, hanging up the phone. You go like, holy shit, maybe this guy is the killer. Like just that like brief little look on his face. So yeah, the movie plays this like in a very effective way.
This mystery genuinely had me guessing until the last second. And I can't say that about many films. Like the whole ending where it's, they're in the mine and Sarah's holding the gun and it's like, who am I going to shoot? Who am I going to shoot? Am I going to shoot Axel, my husband? Am I going to shoot Tom, my long lost lover? Like, who are they? Which one is the killer? And they're both yelling at her. And then like the moment happens when Axel's like, you know what? Just fucking kill us both.
Yeah.
And then that's the moment when it's revealed. It's like, okay, well, it's got to be Tom now. And then the reveal happens. Yeah. And it truly, up until that moment, I was like, man, it could be any one of these motherfuckers. And I found it just a total blast to be part of that energy and be part of that. I really regret not seeing this in theaters. I guess it's just one of those things, right? Like I was a little younger, 2009 was so fucking long ago. But in the before times. But
yeah,
I
from
just
2022 to 2022, that's like what 18 to 36 years ago, something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, around up to 40. But yeah, no, I regret not seeing this because this would have been a blast. I had such a good time watching this, especially that ending. It really worked for me. It really, really did.
Yeah, and I feel silly because on one side I'm listening to us, I'm thinking, are we being like too hyperbolic? Because we're like talking about this movie as if it's like some great piece of like cinematic art, which I mean it is. At the end of the day, it's a very kind of goofy slasher in all the right ways. But again, just to speak to what we were saying about how like the script works better than most and how the actors are doing it all. Chris, I also want to ask you about this. This is a movie where our de facto hero, who is revealed to be our hero at the end, early on in the film, we see that he is cheating on his wife.
Yeah.
Right? He is, first when we first meet him, he's a total asshole in the flashbacks. Then we catch up to him, he's the sheriff, but he's now cheating on Sarah, and Sarah is the character we just love, right? There's no reason not to love Sarah. She's just so likable. We're on her side, and this guy is cheating on her with this mistress. By the end of the film, I don't see a lot of movies don't pull this off very well. I'm back on his side.
Yeah.
And I actually believe that he is sorry and that he's actually cares about Sarah and is trying to protect her. So that's a testament to both the script and Kerr Smith. Like when he, like you said, in that moment where he says, just shoot us both, you'd only be safe if you shoot us both. You go like, holy shit, he's right there. And he's like telling her, I would rather take a bullet and know that you're safe than let anything bad happen to you just because of this misunderstanding. And then he like kind of goes out of his way to protect her. And it's like, holy shit, this guy actually won me back from being kind of a piece of shit earlier. Like that's pretty good for a movie like this. I've seen better films than this not pull that kind of redemption off.
Absolutely. And like what you were saying, how we're just kind of like, we're being so hyperbolic about this, like it's some sort of masterpiece. You know how I am with films and how I come at them. If your film does what it sets out to do, okay, like that's such a simplistic way of thinking about films. But if this movie comes out saying there's a whodunit in this, okay, you should be guessing till the last second whodunit. And if you pull that off, that's awesome. But not only does it do that, we get tons of gore, we get some nudity, we get some gimmicky 3D, we get all the telltale signs of a throwback 1980 slasher film, all mixed up to this great mystery. So yes, My Bloody Valentine 3D isn't fucking Citizen Kane, okay? We get that. It's not Saving Private Ryan. But you know what? For the genre and for what it sets out to do, it really, really succeeds. And that's something that I don't think a lot of films get enough credit for that, because again, you look at a name like this movie, you see the 3D on the title, you immediately slap it, be like, hey, this is just some it's terrible, it's just you stick your nose up at it, and I think this movie supersedes that feeling, and it's a rockin' time. I just really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people refer to this as just like a really strong gimmick movie, and I would just take it past that. I think when you watch in 2D, it still works.
Yeah,
I don't think this is just a gimmick movie. I actually think I would go as far as saying this is a top tier slasher film.
Yep,
and in particular, like modern slashers, right, over the last like 20 or so years, this is like a really strong example of it. And I think like I think I even, if memory serves, like when this came out and then Friday the 13th came out like a little bit later, I think I preferred this at the time. I don't know. It's like really tough. Those are like both films I like quite a bit.
Yeah.
But I think I remember seeing like Friday the 13th and being like, that was pretty good, but I think like My Bloody Valentine was maybe more fun. And that's definitely true, right? This is the more fun movie of those two. Because this is like just kind of more of like a rockin' good time from beginning to end. Like, it has just the right amount of humor peppered in. I love the little moment when, as you said, like Tom Atkins is now the retired sheriff, but there's a scene where he has to like him and the current deputy, a young woman who's a deputy, are going into a home where they believe the miner's in there attacking the family. And she says, "You want to take point?" And he just like thinks about it. He goes, "I'm retired," and he lets the young female deputy go in ahead of him. And it's like, that's great. Like, that's just like, that's such a Tom Atkins kind of moment. And yeah, the entire Todd Farmer Betsy Rue sequence is actually very, very funny. Just a lot of nice little details. Yeah, you're exactly right. This is a movie that it knows what it is and leans into it. It's not being dismissive of its own genre. It's not being like, well, let's make a bad movie to be fun.
Yes.
It's like trying to make a quality movie, right? Because like one of my pet peeves is like intentionally made to be bad movies, which are not as much fun as legit bad movies. But this isn't even that. This is an actual good movie in a particular genre.
Yeah. No, 100%.
Yeah.
And again, I just wish this got sequels because I kind of have an idea for where the sequels would go. Do you want to hear it?
Sure, of course.
So at the end of this film, it's revealed that Tom didn't die by the hand of Sarah. Sarah shoots him, and right? Does he shoot him? No, that's not what happens.
Yeah, no, she does. She shoots through him, and it hits the gas can and it explodes behind him.
Right, there's an explosion. Fuck. How do I forget about explosions? Okay, let me repeat that.
There weren't any transforming robots, so you weren't paying as close of attention.
You son of a bitch. Now I have to keep this in. But yes, he maybe explodes, but then it's revealed that he survives. And the very last shot is him sneaking away from the crime scene in like a firefighter rescue outfit. And then, Tom will be back for more. Well, Trev, for the sequel, you can bring Tom back. Of course, bring him back to wreak havoc once again, because they all do think that he's dead, right? But you know what? We don't really need him to be there for the whole film. If we want him for the whole film, that's fine. And if we want him half the film, it's fine. Because where I think this movie should go is what I alluded to before. When the reveal happens, when Tom is the killer, doesn't Axel or somebody say like, "Is that you, Harry? Is Harry in you?" or something? Like he says something like that, right?
Yeah.
So let's go a step further and actually make that the thing. Let's make it that Harry is like his soul infects people. Let's see that he jumps from body to body, and thus keeping the killer a mystery every single entry. You never know who it's going to be. You never know who Harry's soul infected. And I think that would just be so much fun because you can have characters being related to the main protagonist. You can have it be a random stranger. You can have somebody be the killer and kind of make this movie the new Scream without the meta angle. You know what I mean? Like it could be that whodunit for the horror genre, just the way Scream is. And I just wanted to lean into the supernatural. I think that would be fun.
Yeah, it's an option. I think what's interesting about this movie and the sequel setup it gives you is that there's actually 3 potential paths you could take here, and that they are where they could have gone. So there's what you just mentioned. There's the supernatural element of just saying Harry Warden is like an entity now that somehow like overtakes people. The other version is you could go the same route that the Psycho sequels went, and you could continue this story about the split personalities of Tom Hanniger and make it about, have the sequels be almost like kind of psychological horror. Obviously still the slasher element, but make it about the battle in his mind between the Tom Hanniger part of himself and the Harry Warden part. And you could actually kind of come back around to still making us on Tom Hanniger's side, as we are with Norman Bates in some of the sequels, where you're like, you want to see him get better. You want him to beat this thing. You want him to like be cured, essentially. So that's one element. And then the third one is, fuck it, you could just also just make them straight slashers and be like, uh-oh, Tom Hanniger's back, right? And actually, honestly, that would be fine too. Like, you just say like, hey, Jensen, when you come back, this time you're going to be off the chain the entire time. You're just going to play it crazy throughout. That would also be fun. So you could go any of those directions. Now, Chris, why didn't they? This is where I get super, super frustrated.
Makes no sense.
So in March 2020, in an interview with Bloody Disgusting, Todd Farmer talked about this, and he revealed that him and Patrick Lussier pitched a script for a sequel to Lionsgate. They went to the executives John Sacchi and Michael Pasternak 2 weeks before this film came out. and they pitched their sequel. The only information he's kind of given about it is he says the sequel would have been more psychological. So maybe they were getting to what I was just talking about.
Yep.
Would have brought back survivors from the remake and expand on its backstory. And he does say that they had planned to kill off Sarah, which I'm guessing was probably to kind of make things like even kind of more intense for Axel and Tom. Right?
Yeah.
But he says that apparently Lionsgate lost interest in the sequel, and here's where I lose my freaking mind. Okay, I want to just, before I say this, I want to remind people, because you mentioned this earlier, this movie cost $14 million to make and made $119.9 million worldwide. That is a gigantic hit. They brought a sequel to Lionsgate, and Lionsgate lost interest because the movie received mixed reviews from critics. Huh? When has Hollywood ever cared about that? And what especially drives me nuts about that is, I think you mentioned earlier that this is the studio of Saw. They kept churning out Saw sequels. I'm sorry, apart from maybe the first Saw, were any of those critical darlings? Definitely not, right? So it's just so weird to me that this kind of speaks to what we're saying about how after the slasher boom of the 80s, people got really dismissive of slasher films, and every time they would come back, it was just kind of like these like tribute movies almost, right? Like, hey, we're bringing the slasher back for this like one-off. So we get Friday the 13th comes back this year too, but they don't really rush right into sequels. They overanalyze how to do it. You'll have films like, even like in recent years, right? Like a movie like, I guess that's a bad example, but I was going to say Freaky and Happy Death Day. Happy Death Day got a sequel. But I mean, Gerald, Hollywood doesn't seem as willing to give us like 10 entries in a slasher series anymore, the way they did in the 80s. So like a torture porn series like Saw, they'll franchise that. But this one they're a little bit more unsure of. And that's nonsense. I know Jensen Ackles has said he was willing to come back. Obviously, the filmmakers were willing to come back. We should have got a sequel 2 years later. We should be up to like, as I said, My Bloody Valentine 6 or 7 by this point. How dare they do this to me and not give me these sequels that I deserve, damn it.
You know what the most frustrating thing, though, about the mixed reviews from critics? I'm looking at the Rotten Tomato score right now. Mm-hmm. And in 109 reviews, it's at 61%.
Yeah. Yeah, so, this movie was for a horror film, especially for a slasher film, did pretty well.
Yeah, the fucking tomato's still there. It's not even rotten. Like that is baffling. The audience score is 44%, but whatever. But like the quote is the critics' mixed reviews. Yeah. Just shocking. They made a fucking killing on this movie.
You and I have covered plenty of movies where we've mentioned that people have lost their jobs because of like the negative performance of the movie. This is one where I legit look at it and be like, people at Lionsgate should have lost their job for not greenlighting this sequel.
Yeah, totally.
I'm sorry, if I'm in charge of a studio and I have a movie that costs 14 and made 120, and I say, hey, I'm not sure the reviews were strong enough for a sequel, I should be fired. I'm an idiot. I honestly believe 100%. And yes, I'm sure some of that was the 3D gimmick, but you don't get from 14 million to 120 just off of 3D alone.
No.
People like responded to this movie and found it to be fun. You did leave money on the table by not making a sequel to this. I don't know that a sequel would have made 120. Probably not, but could it have got up to the range of 50 or 60? Sure. And if you kept your budgets moderately low every time, you could have made, I'm sure, at least 2 or 3 profitable sequels to this.
One of the stranger results of any film that we've covered on this podcast. This one is one for the books that like truly doesn't make any sense.
Yep. You know what we need? We need a requel now. We need a legacy sequel. We need them to finally come back to this. Jensen is off of Supernatural. I know he's getting involved with the boys, but I'm sure he'd come back. Like, why not? Let's just do it now.
Yeah. What do we call it? Just Valentine?
No, we call it My Bloody Valentine because that's what they do now. What do we call a new Scream? Scream. Well,
yeah,
What
sure.
do we call Halloween? Halloween. So yeah.
I will push a little bit back on the Scream thing. I think the Scream one makes sense in the context of the film, but fair enough. I know what you're getting at.
I know they did it just so that they could have that joke in the movie. Fine.
Yeah.
But yeah.
All
I'm saying is Scream 4 had the A as the 4. You could have done the same thing with the S and had that be the 5. That's all I'm saying. But
5 Cream is the way to go.
5 Cream. Yep.
Yeah, you love 5 Cream.
I do love 5 Cream. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that will about do it for My Bloody Valentine 3D, a film that me and Trev obviously enjoyed, and I will definitely be watching this one again. Mm-hmm. Moving on from February Frights 3D, we're moving into March. And Trev, you know me and my themes. You know I love a theme month.
I do. You know, it's the bane of my existence. You continue to come up with these theme months.
I know, but I just love them so much, and they're always a pleasure for me to figure it out and find a nice name for it and make you cringe. It's just one of my very special pleasures in life. But we're moving into March, and we're calling this one March Mix-Up. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason we're saying that is we actually do have a little bit of a theme in here, and it's related to the spies. It's related to secret agents. Well, the first movie is March 1st. We're going to be talking about Salt, the 2010 film. And then on March 29th, we're going to be talking about The Rhythm Section from 2020.
Yes.
But in between, doesn't our podcast come out every 2 weeks, Trev?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Well,
so that leaves March 15th. What are we're not talking about a movie March 15th?
Well, we're not going to talk about a failure. That's for sure. What Trev brought to my attention a while ago, and he says, "You know what? We can be sometimes too negative."
Yeah. Why are we putting ourselves through this? Right?
Yes.
Why are we only talking about failures? Yeah. We do love movies. Yeah.
We do, and this is like a very niche type of podcast. Like we get that. We are watching a lot of garbage that people don't want to watch, and then talking about them. Mm-hmm. So we thought, you know what? Let's talk about some stuff that people do love and do like, and things that are successes.
Yes, and that we genuinely get excited about.
Absolutely. So March 15th, we're going to give the first episode of Success to Series, a spin-off show that it will be in your main podcast feed, so there's no need to resubscribe or find it anywhere. It's going to be here. And it's just going to be about films, franchises, TV, series, just things that we love. And the reasons why they were successful, the reasons why people keep coming back, why people still talk about them, our own personal anecdotes, the reason why. And I think it's just going to be a really, really nice divergence from what we usually talk about. Mm-hmm. And we're going to start off with James Bond, 007. It is the 60th anniversary this year of the James Bond franchise. So we thought, you know what? Let's go out first with James Bond, and I'm very much looking forward to that.
It's perfect. 60th anniversary. Daniel Craig just wrapped up his kind of much acclaimed turn as James Bond. Right now, we're starting to get into the hype and excitement about who is going to be the next James Bond. So let us, while they decide to probably be assholes and bypass Idris Elba, even though that's the clear choice. Let's us talk about our love for that franchise. So yes, like Success to Series, it's not going to be like, we're not going to do it every month, but every once in a while, we'll pop in with our thoughts on a particular, like you said, TV show or movie series that actually has worked. And we'll be able to kind of provide a contrast between that and a lot of the failures we otherwise look at. So I'm excited about it. And even to like kind of, compare that against something like Salt, or more interestingly, the Rhythm Section, which actually comes from some of the makers of the Bond franchise. So just see where did they get it right and where did they get it wrong?
Yeah, it's gonna be a really good month. So, follow us on all the socials at F2F Pod. That's at F2, the number 2F Pod. Like us there, like us everywhere. Rate, review, whatever you do. Shoot us a star rating. Keep this train rolling. And also, just join the tribe, hit that subscribe, and you get to hear us every 2 weeks. And
What more can anyone ask for in life than to hear from us every 2 weeks?
Yeah. You know what they could ask you? Trev, will you be my Valentine?
Gross.
Respectfully.
Respectfully, yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks.